I think we'll go ahead and get started. We have 43 people participating right now, and I think I heard there were 45 church leaders who had registered. So I'm sure we'll have more people drop in as time goes on here. But I want to welcome everybody to the church leaders session of the annual International Affirmation Conference. My name is Evan Smith. I'm participating today from my home in Halifax, Massachusetts, which is a town about 35 miles south of Boston, near Plymouth, if you're familiar with the area at all. I'm a member of the Plymouth Ward and the Hingham Stake here in Massachusetts. And I've been asked to participate on and moderate the panel for this session today, which I'm very excited to do. As far as I know, after decades of doing an annual conference, this is the first time that the Affirmation Conference has been virtual. This is my first time participating in the conference, so I kind of wish it was in person. I'm sure we all do. I'd love to meet people. I was planning on that this year, but there are some benefits to being virtual. Like I think we're having more geographically widespread participation, which is great. And I hope you are all, despite the fact that some of the panelists that you'll see we're in our Sunday best. I think we dress that way so that all the church leaders attending would feel comfortable, because what's a church leaders meeting without people being dressed up? But hopefully you're all in your casual clothes and we can all have a good conversation here. I also I haven't worn my pride pin on my lapel for months now because I haven't been attending church because of COVID, so it's nice to be able to put that back on. I want to let everybody know that we are being recorded. This session will be available afterwards as well. So that's, I guess, another good reason for the panelists, for the participants to not wear for me anyway, my hoodie sweatshirt that I've been wearing for work calls for the last few months. Participating in this session are people who paid for the conference, whether they're a church leader or not, and anyone who selected the church leaders track option when you were registering. Please remember that if you signed up as a leader, you not only get access to this session, but you can also watch the QPR suicide prevention training sessions over the coming weekends for free as well. Check the schedule at conference.affirmation.org to see the times for when those suicide prevention trainings take place. The way that this session is going to transpire, and there's been a lot of thought and prayer put into this, we hope it goes well and is uplifting for everyone, is the first hour will be the 5 panelists sharing our stories, taking turns to kind of describe our backgrounds and our experiences, and any personal advice that we may have. And then the second hour will be panelists answering questions. There won't be a break during the 2 hours because we figured that since everybody's remotely, you can shut off your video stream and put it on mute, do whatever you need to take personal breaks as needed throughout the 2 hours. Only the panelists will be speaking, so we'd ask everyone to please mute their Zoom during this session. But that doesn't mean that you can't ask questions. We really want questions to be asked, and we've thought about it and thought the best way to get questions asked during the session anyway would be to have people send them in by chat. So you just have to go to the bottom of your screen. You'll see the chat feature there. You can ask questions to the entire group, or you can, if you want the question to be anonymous, you can send it to just me, and I will read the question without saying who it came from. And if you want your question directed to a panelist in particular, let me know when you send that chat question in. So we did solicit some questions in advance of this meeting over Facebook, and we prepared some questions in advance. So we do have some to address, even if nothing comes in by chat. But we do encourage everyone to submit questions as we go by chat. After this 2 hours of discussion, so at about 1:10, we will have some breakout rooms for personal discussion, and I'll post in the chat some links for each panelist to have their separate breakout rooms. So if anyone has a question that they want to discuss with the panelist in particular, all 5 of us have our own separate breakout rooms that we can have those discussions. So I'll very briefly introduce our panelists now. We'll start with Summer Lee Corey. Let me see if I can get this spotlight feature to work the right way here. There's Summer. All right. Summer Lee Corey is co-author of the book Come Out, Stay Out, the first book in the forthcoming Flip Out series. She's a passionate advocate for access and inclusion, and a married lesbian woman who is actively engaged with the church. And as I go through all these, you look in the chat, I've already pasted in links for everyone, all of our, sort of social media or writings or podcasts. So that stuff is available there for each of us. Next is Ben Schilotti. Let me spotlight you, Ben. Let's see. My Zoom skills are being tested here, everyone. Ben, why don't you say hi and everybody can see you for a second?
Hello.
All right. Ben is a popular blogger, author of a forthcoming book, A Walk in My Shoes, Questions I'm Often Asked as a Gay Latter-day Saint. He's the co-host of the podcast Questions from the Closet, a BYU Honor Code administrator, and current high counselor serving in Provo, Utah. Valerie, why don't you go ahead and say hi, and then I'll read your quick intro.
Hello, everyone.
All right. Valerie is a writer, a transgender woman who was married for 34 years before transitioning following the passing of her wife, the father to 5 children and grandfather to 6 grandchildren, and active in the church in St. Louis. Richard, why don't you say hi?
Unmute my hello, everybody.
All right. Richard Osler is a former YSA bishop, host of the podcast Listen, Learn, and Love, and author of the book Listen, Learn, and Love, Embracing LGBTQ Latter-day Saints. And then last is me, again, Evan Smith, author of a free navigable ebook released last month called Gay Latter-day Saint Crossroads. I'm a former bishop and state presidency counselor here in Massachusetts and father of an adult gay son. So here, what we'll do, we'll start with me sharing some of my background and story, and then we'll proceed after that. We'll hear from Summer, Ben, Valerie, and then Richard. All right. Just to make sure I don't go too long, I wrote down what I'm going to say. If you want the long version, again, look at those links. I think all of us have longer versions of our stories that you can access in those links that are in the chat. So I was born in the church and grew up in Murray, Utah. After my mission and then getting my undergraduate degree at BYU, I moved east for law school and have been practicing corporate transactional law in Boston since 2003. My wife and I have 4 kids. 2 boys ages 21 and 19 and 2 girls ages 17 and 13. Our oldest son, Weston, is gay. While living here in Massachusetts these last 17 years, my wife and I, Cheryl and I, have had the privilege of serving in a lot of church leadership positions. For me, that's included serving as a branch president and then a bishop from 2011 to 2016. Our branch kind of became a ward over the course of the 5 years I was serving, so the calling changed from branch president to bishop. And then I later served as a counselor in our state presidency here from 2017 to 2019. Wes came out to us privately in 2015 while I was serving as bishop, and that was about a month before the November 2015 church policy on gay couples and their kids was announced. Wes finally came out publicly just last year when he came home a few months early from his full-time mission. I strive to be an LGBTQ ally today, but I didn't always feel that way because I believed what the church taught when I was growing up about how having a gay sexual orientation was an evil choice. I occasionally and unfortunately and very regretfully made insensitive or homophobic comments in many contexts, including in my home in front of my kids over the years. Fortunately, I had conversations with work colleagues here in Massachusetts about politics that helped me develop a tiny bit of tolerance for new ideas. And that in 2013 was very helpful because I had a 14-year-old young man come and see me as branch president He's given me permission to share his story. He wanted to talk to me about same-gender sexual attractions that he was experiencing. I had known him for 10 years since he was a little toddler in primary. He was one of the most spiritual and devout members of our large branch, let alone one of the most spiritual youth. I hadn't studied gay sexual orientation much when he came and talked to me, so I didn't know how to advise him. So I just told him that he was loved, and I'd like to meet with him again. And that bought me some time to do a lot of research, and I studied like crazy because I had never really had someone that I knew and loved tell me they were gay. I learned in the course of my studies that just the year before, so in 2012, the church had released a new website called mormonsandgays.org, which is now found at the Gospel Topics page in the church website under the topic same-sex attraction. On that site, I learned for the first time that despite prior prophetic teachings I was familiar with, the church was now saying that just being gay wasn't actually a sin at all. Acting on it was, but being gay was not. I also read from other sources a lot about the science behind homosexuality, and including what former BYU microbiology professor and former mission president Bill Bradshaw was saying, that gay sexual orientation was absolutely the result of nature, not nurture, which again was something that was new to me. I also had read a lot about how many LGBTQ people suffer severe psychological harm from religious teachings that say gay sexual behavior is sinful. I remember, because I knew what a good kid this young man was, kind of forcing my brain to run empathy scenarios to try to better understand how I might feel if I was in his shoes. I still remember the morning when it dawned on me how different it is from the perspective of hope to ask a straight single person in the church to seek out or to just wait for marriage in this life or the next, versus asking a gay single person to proactively avoid falling in love their whole life. I also remember thinking how hard it would be for me as a straight guy to look forward to the celestial kingdom if it meant I had to be married forever to another person toward whom I had no attraction. So to another man, in my case. All that learning and pondering helped me feel more prepared to counsel with that young man with greater love as we met together many times over the next few years. He understood what the church's options were for him, that he should be celibate his whole life or that he could marry a woman. I remember struggling to encourage him to stay in the church because I knew how hard that would be, but I still did that. I encouraged him to stay because I felt like that's what I needed to do as a bishop. He has since gone on to serve a mission and is currently finishing his undergraduate degree at BYU. I know he's having a hard time trying to figure out his life kind of one step at a time. All of that learning and experience really helped me for when my own son, Wes, came out to Cheryl and me privately in 2015 when he was 16. Wes had tried to date girls in high school and it didn't go well. He had been depressed and we later learned suicidal for over a year before he came out to us. A couple months before he came out to us, I had led a combined youth, Relief Society, and Melchizedek priesthood third-hour lesson as bishop. I did that in response to the First Presidency's letter that came out shortly after the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage. And that letter asked for all the bishops to reiterate the church's position that gay marriage was still a sin. And I did that. I reiterated that message, but I spent most of that special third-hour lesson talking about the church's new website that I wasn't new by that point. I guess it was a few years old, but that just focused on how same-sex attraction was not a choice, that we need to be better at loving and including our LGBTQ brothers and sisters than we have been in the past. And little did I know that Wes was on pins and needles kind of listening to that lesson, and that was the thing that finally made him feel safe enough to come out to Cheryl and me. And I'm eternally grateful for that tender mercy that he heard me talking that way about gay people so that he could feel safe. Wes went on to serve a mission a couple years later, even though I later found out that Cheryl had begged him not to go because she was so worried about his mental health. But he said he wanted to help people and further develop his relationship with God. So he went and he was called to Brazil. He told our stake president he was gay before he left. Our stake president was great about it. So was Wes's mission president. We were still worried about him because we knew there were insensitive missionaries and members saying hurtful things, though. About a year into his mission, I found a peer-reviewed 2017 study done at the University of Georgia, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, that showed that around 90% of LGBTQ Latter-day Saints have at least one symptom of PTSD resulting directly from basic church teachings on gender, sexuality, family, and marriage. And that 73% suffered from multiple PTSD symptoms from those church teachings. Seeing that study really hit me. Just seeing the effect that church teaching so clearly had on the vast majority of LGBTQ people, and knowing that my own son, my gay son, was serving a mission teaching those things, I just began to be really worried for his safety too. But I didn't say anything to him about it because I wanted him to figure out his own path for himself. He wouldn't have really let me give him kind of any direction anyway. I just asked how he was doing every week. We made a deal before he left that he'd tell us if he was ever thinking of hurting himself. So while I was worried, I trusted him to let us know before anything got out of hand. He kind of reached that point after 18 months on his mission, following intense study and prayer about what God wanted for him. He had a very spiritual experience where he felt personal revelation very clearly that he was not supposed to be a lifelong celibate. So to avoid further trauma, he came home after 19 months, after having served 19 months on his mission, and told us that we could finally be public and open with everyone about him being gay. I was serving in the stake presidency at that time. He gave a homecoming talk and reported to the High Council when he came home. A month after he came home, I gave a talk in the general session of stake conference here that largely focused on how we can better love LGBTQ people in the church. 6 months after all of that, I was released from the stake presidency, not because I gave a talk on LGBTQ at all. I actually had a lot of good feedback about that, but it was because our stake president moved, and the new stake president actually asked for me to stay on as a counselor in the stake presidency. But my wife and I felt the need to walk away from that calling. Literally, we walked out of the building, the church building, because some statements of the general authority who was extending the calling to me made us feel very uncomfortable and made us feel like we couldn't continue to kind of have the dichotomy that was going on in our lives. I don't have time to get into the details of that experience here. You can read or listen more about it in my book or our podcast episode that we did with Richard Osler. But general authority basically said we shouldn't hope for change in the church, even just privately, and suggested that we needed to feel sad about Wes's decision to leave the church. But we didn't feel sad about it because we knew that for him, it was the only decision that was productive for his emotional and mental well-being. And we felt comfortable that God was behind it all somehow, maybe like an exception, similar to how Adam and Eve transgressed the commandments so they might have a family, or like one of those kind of spiritual promptings that people have sometimes that are really only understood best in hindsight. So we couldn't feel sad about it. And we also couldn't agree to stop hoping for change in the church, because that would mean we'd have to stop hoping that Wes could be both mentally healthy and someday be in the church with us again. So it was a hard thing to hear. But fortunately, that general authority, and to his credit, he apologized the next day to us. And we always had no hard feelings. He's a good man and forgiven. A week later, Cheryl made a Facebook post that was pretty long and talked about our family story. That inspired me to start writing down all my thoughts about my personal journey, and also a lot of thoughts about why I think hope for doctrinal change isn't crazy, and how I can see a scriptural path for gay marriage to eventually being accepted by the church. That turned into a really long document that a talented editor that I was working with, Marcy McPhee, and she's on, she can smile, she convinced me to call it a book. I was a little hesitant. I didn't think that I started out writing a book, but it has over 200 pages and an index of hundreds of resources on doctrine, science, studies, and other things. And so it is appropriately called a book. It's a free ebook. It's at gayldscrossroads.org. Since it's been released last month, we've had a few thousand unique visitors that have gone to check it out. Maybe they've just looked at it because it's free, I don't know. But we have had a lot of good feedback from it. a lot of people who are in this crossroads of LGBTQ well-being and church doctrine have provided feedback saying books help them to see a way to keep their hope alive and stay in the church. So I've been happy to hear that it's been helpful for some people. But most importantly, I'm happy that Wes is doing well now. He's kept his faith in Christ, even though he's distanced himself from what he feels are harmful church teachings. He's been on some dates with a few guys over the last year and a half. Nothing serious, no husband material yet, but it's been really wonderful to see him living authentically and with hope now for his future. So that is my story. Summer, you want to go ahead and give your story, your background?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. So hello, everyone. My name is Summer Lee Corey, and I'm really excited to be here with you, with my fellow panelists, and with Affirmation. And before we begin, I just want to make sure everyone knows my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a married lesbian woman currently part of and navigating my relationship with LDS Church. I'm currently a university student at Utah Valley University, and I'm studying exercise science with the goal of getting my doctorate in physical therapy. I was born and raised in Hawaii, and I really love nature. I love being outside. I love the ocean, looking at the stars, eating butter pecan ice cream, and listening to people's stories. My hope in being part of this panel today is to be your friend. And I hope that you'll want to be my friend as well, that especially you will be friends to any and all LGBTQ+ people in your congregations. Taken from John 15, Christ said, "Ye are my friends." Friendship plays a really important role in my life. Friends have been angels lifting me up during heavy times. Friends have given me hope. Friends continue to give me strength and confidence in myself. When I came out to my ward in Salt Lake City, that's where I'm currently at, it was during a talk, and my family was new in the ward. We'd all been given speaking assignments, and I really wanted to start a new page. I wanted to be open and authentic with the people in the congregation that I hoped would become my friends. In my talk, I spoke about kind of the gray space that I exist in as a lesbian Latter-day Saint. And I spoke about my dreams, of my belief that God is love, and of my gratitude for being a gay woman. And after my talk, the bishop at the time came up to me, and I was walking down the podium stairs when he stopped to shake my hand, and he told me, "We need you here. We need your story." And he repeated once again, "We need you." And as I was walking to class, the Relief Society president came to me and gave me a hug. And she handed me the flowers that had been displayed on the podium and said that they were for me. She thanked me for being brave and open, and she said the same thing that the bishop had said to me: "We need you." If we rewind many years back to one of my old home wards, a well-meaning young woman leader was giving a lesson on chastity and pulled up two young women from the group. "This," she said, motioning to the two, "is not right." She pulled up two other young men. "This," she said, "is unnatural, ungodly. This is wrong." Of course, on that same Sunday, we had invited a dear friend to church, and after this kind of horrifying lesson, she had no interest in learning about the LDS religion. The message was harsh, and the message was clear to me as a young gay girl: you do not belong here. All of these interactions with church leaders have had a really profound effect on me and the ways that I've felt safe and accepted by different wards. The first two quickly extended their hands to me in love and friendship, and the last pushed me away, implied that I was an enemy. So my call to you with this panel as church leaders is to be our friends. We are your friends and you are our friends. As LGBTQ+ folks, we are worthy of your love just as you are worthy of ours, and we are worthy of your friendship. Are you friends with the LGBTQ+ members in your ward? Do you practice love unconditionally as Christ would have us? What kind of church leader do you want to be known as? Thank you.
Thank you, Summer. Ben, you want to go ahead?
Of course. Hello, everyone. Like Evan said in my introduction, I teach at BYU. I'm also an honor code administrator there. Well, I'm more an honor code administrator who also teaches. And when I teach my classes on Zoom, I have everyone unmute because I like to hear their laughter when I make jokes. Otherwise, I just feel silly. So I will imagine all of your laughter every time I make a good joke. There's a lot of my story that I could share, and I was wondering, which parts it would be the most important to share with you today. And as I've thought about that, I just want to share a little bit of the journey of my life in recent years, and not talk about the beginning, which was just so long ago. But when I was 29, I fell in love with a man, and I did not mean to. He was someone that came into my life. I wasn't pursuing a relationship, and we fell deeply in love. And it got to a point where I was trying to stay in the church and keep him with me, and he was trying to leave the church and pull me with him. And it got to a point where we just couldn't make that work anymore. And I remember him asking if I would be his boyfriend, and I said, no, I can't be your boyfriend because I'm active in the church, and that's not right. And so he finally said, we're calling this quits, this is over. And I was devastated, like absolutely devastated. And I dated women before, and many of them had dumped me, and I'd always been a little sad, but it wasn't such a big deal. But when this guy dumped me, it felt like my heart actually broke. I was like, oh, this is why they call it heartbreak. I get it now. There's like a hole inside of me that just couldn't be filled. And not knowing what to do, I was living in Arizona at the time, and he was living in Utah. I got in my car and drove to Utah, and I told him that I had changed my mind, that I was going to pick him over the church because I didn't know how to live without him. And he, being incredibly kind, said, Ben, I know you better than that. And I know you would choose the church over me in the future. We cannot have a relationship. And so even more devastated than before, I got back into my car and drove to Seattle, where I am from, and went to my parents' house and sprawled out on their living room floor and just unloaded years of experiences onto them. And I've shared this story a lot, but as I was talking to my parents, my mom said the kindest thing. After hearing years of bottled up experiences come out, she said, Ben, we're not just on your side, we're with you 100%. If you need to leave the church and marry a man, you and he will always be part of our family. And so having permission from my family to leave the church and pursue a same-sex relationship, I had to decide, well, what do I want to do? And I had felt trapped in a doctrine and a culture that I felt like had no place for me, that there was no way for me to move forward. And so I spent about a month at home on summer break, trying to figure out what to do with my life. And every day I read the scriptures. As I read the scriptures, it was like that empty part of me that I'd felt ever since Jordan had broken up with me started to fill in. And then I would stop reading the scriptures and it would come back. And I started to realize what was happening. Like as I focused on the spiritual part of me, I'd start to feel whole again, but I still didn't know how I could move forward with my life. And I remember reading the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and him praying to the Father and saying, Father, if thou be willing, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. And I hadn't realized this before, but he made that prayer 3 times. 3 times he said, God, I want out of this. Is there any way I can get out of this? But if there isn't, I'll do it. And I felt like that. I felt like I was just being crushed. And I felt like I just needed to figure out what God wanted me to do. And so as I prayed and pondered, I felt very confidently that I needed to continue living church teachings, and I needed to go back to Arizona to finish my graduate degree. Well, I was considering not going back to finish my degree because I was just such a devastated mess. So I went back to Arizona and realized that the way I'd living wasn't working for me. And I was getting close I was 30, getting close to turning 31. I realized that I couldn't live how I'd been living before. And one of the things I've been doing a lot was lying about my orientation. I was just trying to play straight and pass as straight. And I decided that when I got back to Tucson, where I was going to school, that I would no longer hide, and that when it came up organically, I would tell people what was actually going on in my life. And so I went to the Institute right after getting back, and we were playing volleyball one night, and this new guy had moved to town, and afterwards we were just chatting. He was unloading all of his girl troubles on me, which I was happy to listen to. And then he said, Ben, how is your dating life going? Do you have any girl troubles? And I thought, oh, this is the time to see if I'm actually going to do what I decided to do. And I said, well, actually, no, because I'm gay. And that was honestly a very courageous thing for me to do. And he responded with so much love and kindness. And he asked me some good questions, and we became friends, and it wasn't such a big deal. And so with courage from that experience, I came out to everyone in my life over the next 6 months, in text messages and phone calls and emails and in person. And I just felt the need to do that. And as I was doing that, I felt this push to come out on my blog, which I then did. And after that, I started getting all these messages from strangers asking me, telling me, I read your blog post, I'm also gay and a member of the church, and I don't know what to do. And I responded to all these emails, but I realized I was the only gay Latter-day Saint I knew about in Tucson, and statistically, that there was no way that was possible. So I reached out to my stake president, who I didn't know very well at the time, and told him I wanted to start a support group for gay Latter-day Saints in the area. And he set up a meeting with me, and we talked about it, and he was very supportive and helped me, and he even assigned a high counselor to work with me, and we set up the support group in Tucson. And that was one of the best things I have ever done, starting that support group, because the 24 or so of us that joined that group became family. And shortly after having this meeting with the stake president, I came out to my institute class in a comment, and the institute director invited me to speak at one of the Friday devotionals about my experiences as a gay member of the church. And I hadn't prepared any remarks before that, but before the devotional, I just prayed and pondered and read the scriptures to try and get into a spiritual place. And when I walked up to the podium, I said something that I had never said before, and that I had not prepared to say. I had not planned on saying. And I said, Brother Bauer asked me to speak today about my experiences as a gay Latter-day Saint, but I'm actually here to talk to you about the atonement of Jesus Christ. And that was my first time speaking publicly about my experiences as a gay person, and I was able to just see how my life and my experiences had taught me so much about the reality of Jesus Christ and his atonement and the enabling power of his grace. And then shortly after that, I graduated without honors from the singles ward. When I turned 31, I started attending a Spanish branch. And much like Evan said, that Sunday lesson where we talked about, about gay marriage, I was at that lesson in the Spanish branch. And I remember thinking, I don't want to go to that. I don't want to have this lesson. And I almost went home, but I decided not to. And I remember walking into the Relief Society room, and I said a prayer. I said, Heavenly Father, I am not going to say a word, but if you want me to, you have to make it very clear. And in the middle of the lesson, my hand just went up in the air, and I said, we're talking about gay people as if they're a group separate from us. But there are a lot of gay people who are active in the church and want to be engaged in it, and I'm one of those people. And I remember the branch president coming up to me and giving me a high five and saying, "You are my hero." And he talked about his daughter, who was a lesbian and who had left the church, and he shared some personal stories. And the tone of the room shifted from what are we going to do to protect ourselves from gay people, to how are we going to make sure that everyone feels loved and welcomed in our congregation. And that was a really beautiful moment for me. And I remember at the end of that meeting, we sang "Families Can Be Together Forever." And I'd often, as a single white person, I'd felt kind of out of place in the Spanish branch. And I remember as we sang "Families Can Be Together Forever," I just felt intensely, these people are my family. And not long after that, I transferred to an English-speaking family ward, and I was asked to give a talk. And before giving my talk, I asked the bishop if I could come out in my talk, and he said, "I don't see why that would be a problem." And so I did. I came out in my talk, and it was a really good experience. And then afterwards, there was a receiving line of people who just wanted to thank me for being so open and honest, and telling me that they were so happy that I was going to be in the ward with them. And that was not a reaction I had expected. I learned months later that there was an investigator at church who I later became good friends with, who had recently got out of prison, covered in tattoos, and he felt like maybe Latter-day Saints wouldn't be so welcoming and kind to someone like him. And he said that when I came out, he looked around the room to see how everyone was going to respond, and all he saw were smiles and nods. And he said, if they can be accepting of Ben, they can be accepting of someone like me. And he joined the church. About a year and a half later, I moved to Provo to start a master's in social work, which I have since completed. And I had been told that Provo would not be as kind to me as Tucson had been. And a number of people recommended that I go back into the closet, not be open about my orientation. So my first Sunday in my ward here in Provo, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I wasn't sure if I was going to be honest. And that very first Sunday, I had a get to know you meeting with the bishop. And he asked me what I was doing in Provo, and I said, I just started a master's in social work. And he said, well, why are you doing that? I said, well, I want to become a therapist, and I want to work with LGBTQ Latter-day Saints and their families because I'm gay. And I didn't know how he was going to respond. And this is what he said. This is one of the first things he said. He said, Ben, what do I need to know and understand so I can serve you better? And that question just filled me with the Spirit. And we had a good discussion. He didn't have a lot of time to talk because it was just a 5-minute get to know you thing. He said, Ben, I want to hear more of your story. Can I take you out to lunch? I was like, of course. Free lunch to talk about myself is one of my favorite things. So he took me to lunch not long after that, and he has done that multiple times in the 3 years since. He just took me to lunch last week, actually. And I remember getting to my car that Sunday and literally shouting for joy because I knew I had found my place. So the reason I share these stories is because I was at a number, I've been at a number of places where being in the church didn't feel like a possibility for me, where it just didn't feel like the right way forward. And multiple times, priesthood leaders have amplified my voice and given me the opportunity to speak and to do the things that I felt called to do. And I am just disheartened by the amount of times I hear people who are shut down and closed off and silenced by their leaders. And I just want you to know that I am in the church today because I have a strong testimony of the restoration, and also because church leaders have facilitated a place where I feel like I'm at home and where I feel like I can be a part of Zion. And I know that you can do that too. So the reason I'm here today is because I want to help you know what you can do to make sure that your ward is Zion for everyone who wants to be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. That's great. Valerie, do you want to go ahead? Valerie, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I was muted.
Yeah.
I'm fixed now. Believe me, it's better if I'm muted sometimes. So, as was mentioned in my intro, I am a transgender woman. I remain active in the church. I am a father to 5 children and I have 6 grandchildren. I was married for 34 years until I was widowed in approximately 4 years ago. I have known that I was a girl or a woman since I was 4 years old, although I did not know how to tell people that other than saying the words, I'm a girl, and that was not going to go over well where I was. I was being raised by a single mother who had 2 young boys that she was raising. And one evening she was, well, probably several evenings, she was praying about how she would continue to raise these 2 boys. And I think part of that may have been that she was already seeing tendencies in me. And so she was concerned about having a masculine influence in my life. And frankly, there are many incidents that came later than that indicated that she was aware that, I don't know that she knew what it was, but she knew that there was something different. And I will say that this was in the very late 60s, early 70s, so she probably assumed that I was gay and was trying to focus on that aspect of it. I don't think she understood that I was transgender. And well, I'm not sure even the word even existed at that point. But she was praying about how to raise these 2 young boys, and 2 young men knocked on her door. And she opened the door, and there before her were these 2 young men with clean-cut ties, shirts, and she immediately knew that this was who she wanted her kids to be. And shortly after that, she joined the church, and so I was probably about 5 or 6 years old at that point. And so from that point forward, I lived the life of a fairly typical Mormon boy. We went through scout camp. We did all of the young men's things, all the priesthood advancements, everything that was going along. All the while me knowing that it was not necessarily the right thing for me, but not knowing how to articulate that. And then about, when I was about 10 years old, approximately, My aunts had taught me to play tennis, and I loved to play tennis, and I had tennis magazines, and I picked up a magazine and I read the story of Dr. Renee Richards, who was the first, and as far as I know, only professional transgender player on the women's circuit for professional tennis. And that was the day that I found out who I was. That was the day that I found out that it was possible to transition. And so from that day forward, that was my goal. But I did not know how to do it. At the time, I was living in Lubbock, Texas, which I have recently learned is the second most conservative city in the United States, right behind Provo. So I certainly understood much later in life why I was never going to transition in that environment. So I didn't. So we continued with the normal Mormon male experience. I went through high school. It's handy when you're Mormon because you're told not to date till you're 16 anyway. So I didn't have to deal with a lot of social interaction, and in fact, I was I kind of kept to myself and focused on myself and being focused on science and things like that, because that was where my inclinations were. But I knew at this point that I still needed to deal with this. But it was a subject of shame and guilt my entire childhood, and it took a long time before that went away. And just as almost any transgender person will tell you, they wish this would go away so desperately. And it doesn't go away, but you assume that it will. You say, well, the first time I kiss a girl, it'll go away. The first time I get a girlfriend, it'll go away. When I get married, it'll go away. When I have my first child, it'll go away. But it doesn't. It gets stronger and stronger over time. And so when we were married, at about our 14th year of marriage, my wife and I were in counseling for other issues. That's another long story. And the counselor, who was a member of the church, but not with LDS services, she was working on me to become more connected with who I was, as opposed to what I do. And she gave me some homework. She said, you have to go home. You have to, without using words, because I do write and I will use words in very strategic ways, sometimes as weapons. But she said, you cannot use words. You have to use something creative to talk to me, to tell me who you are, as opposed to what you do. And I left that meeting not knowing what to do. I'm not creative, which is why she was pushing it. And as I drove around thinking about that, I realized finally, and it was a frightening realization, that I knew what I had to do. I finally had to tell another human being that I was, at the time I was using the word cross-dresser because I didn't fully understand transgender at the time. But it was the first time I told anybody. And so I went home and I went to the store and I bought a couple of ugly dresses and some bad makeup. And then at the time I was working out of town, so I would take those with me with my video camera. And I would learn to dress myself and to put on makeup. And then I did this big old long interview with myself on video, talking about my past, my childhood, what I thought the influences might be, what I thought the origins might be, but that I didn't know. And I finished this, and a few weeks later, I went back to see this therapist. And I said, I'm just going to show you this videotape. And we watched it, and we finished, and she looked at me and she said, thank you. Now we have to find your style. And it was the most loving response, and not what I expected. And that was my first foray with a church member, telling them who I actually was. and being accepted for that. So we decided it was time to tell my wife, and we spent the next couple of weeks preparing to do that. And at the time, I was executive secretary in the bishopric. And one day during bishopric meeting, I get a phone call, and it's my wife, and she has found the clothes that I was using to make that videotape. And she decided that I must be having an affair, and she was very, very upset. I said, don't get the kids ready, don't bring them to church, I'll come home and I'll explain everything. I went home and I told her what was going on and that we had planned to tell her in just another week or two. And she did not believe me. She thought that was a very elaborate story to hide an affair, and she didn't know why I would do it that way. And so I contacted the counselor, and we all got together on a Sunday evening, sitting in a parking lot of a mall in our van with a VCR watching this tape. And then the counselor sat with her in her van while I walked around the mall a little bit so they could discuss this. And then that of course led to lots of negotiations about how we would do this. And in a nutshell, that came down to, we were not going to tell our children, nor were we going to tell anyone else, because frankly, my wife's mental state was not where she could handle people knowing this about her. And so she absolutely did not want anyone to know that she was married to, again, we didn't know the word, but someone who was transgender. So we didn't tell anyone. We did not tell our kids, primarily because we did not want our kids to have to keep secrets from other people about their parents. And if we weren't going to be open and out about this, we needed to make sure that they weren't put in that position. So that's the way things continued for the next 20 years until my wife passed away. I did go out occasionally and got to be a little bit more comfortable with being who I am. And she was sometimes supportive and sometimes very upset about it, but we continued to negotiate. Once she passed away, I contacted my kids and I basically told them that this is what's happening and that I would no longer not be myself in my own home. And anytime that I was at home, I was Valerie. And anytime that I was at work or at church, I was still my old persona. So that lasted a while, and I thought that would be the rest of my life until I had a couple of incidents occur. One was that I joined an LGBT group because someone invited me, because at work, and right after my wife passed away, I went and got my ears pierced because it was something I'd wanted to do my entire life. Someone saw that, invited me to this group, and that's when I was told basically that it was safe to transition at work. I did not have to worry about losing my employment, which is something every transgender person is deathly afraid of. I did not want to do it at the time. I thought I still wouldn't. That was in April of 2018. When my wife passed away, I went and bought lots of cultural tickets to cultural events so that I could have opportunities to go out and be myself. And so all of my social life outside of the house and work and church was as Valerie. And one night I was sitting in a play and I looked around and I thought, this is right. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of living a dual life. And that was the moment I decided that it was time to finally transition. 2 months later, I went to talk to my bishop, and the poor guy, he was a fairly new bishop. I'd known him for years, but he was a new bishop, and I said, okay, new bishop, I've got something for you. And I said, I'm transgender, and I'm transitioning on January 1 of 2019, and I only want to know if I'll still be welcome here. Because I had decided that as long as I was welcome, I would continue to be a member of the church as much as I was allowed, and I would continue to attend regardless of what happened. I had access to the information about how the church's policies on transgender people, mostly in Handbook 1, but my positions had allowed me to see that. And so I fully anticipated excommunication at some point, and had decided that I would, even if excommunicated, continue to be a member of the church. we had a long conversation because he had to learn what transgender meant. He had to learn what it meant to transition. We discussed the differences between social transition and medical transition and surgical transition, and determined where I was at that time. A month later, I spoke with our stake president. We had a similar conversation, and in both cases, I have to say that I was met with nothing but loving welcome. And even as my stake president told me what my restrictions would be on my membership and attendance in church, I still felt that he was doing it because that's what he was required to do, and I don't think he really wanted to. That's for him to determine. But it was still met with love. And so I did ask when these restrictions would start, because we had this meeting in like August, and he told me that it would start immediately based upon my current appearance, because my ears were pierced and I had longer nails and I was wearing nail polish, and had been doing so for the prior 2 years as the senior youth Sunday school teacher. He then told me that these were my restrictions, and I asked when they would start. He said, well, based upon your appearance, they should start right now. I said, well, that's fine. Then I will go ahead and transition at church now. I won't wait until January. I talked to my bishop. I said, inform the ward council, let them know what's happening. And then 2 weeks later, I showed up at church as Valerie with no preamble. There were 2 people in the ward who knew about it beforehand. And once again, I have been met with nothing but love by my congregants. I did not know what to expect. I spent the first several months showing up at church 15 minutes early so that I could get a seat by myself to see who would choose to sit next to me, and so that I would not impose myself on anyone else during the meeting. It has been a loving ward. There have been some small instances, well, only one really bad instance, and it wasn't even someone who was attending at the time. But I had several people in the ward who, they've known me for years. I've been in this ward for close to 30 years. So they've known me for a long time. And it was hard for them, because when someone transitions, you don't just transition everyone around. You have to go through a transition as well. And I had people who did not talk to me for months. But when they did, and we had the conversations and they understood what was going on, they became allies and supporters. I have to say that my experience with church has been remarkable. I knew walking in what restrictions would be placed on my membership, and I accepted them. And in a discussion recently I had with someone who was talking about faith crisis, they asked about if anybody had gone through one, and I said I went through a reverse faith crisis. I spent close to 50 years being a member of this church, doing things that I didn't think I should be doing. I did not think I should be working in the priesthood. I did not think I should be there as a male, and I sometimes did not want to be there. And once I transitioned, I found out very, very strongly that I wanted to be here, that the things that I believed, the core of the gospel, was absolutely true, and this is where I belonged. And so I dealt with the dichotomy, because I spent years not wanting to be there necessarily, but being fully welcomed by the church. And when I got rid of my facade and became who I was, suddenly the church felt hostile towards me. And so I had to work through that. I had to work past it. I had to know that I was where I was supposed to be. I had to know that I was right with God. And in fact, many years before, in fact, just after my wife had found out we had chosen not to talk to our kids, it was right about that time I was set apart as the Elders Quorum president. And that was a remarkable experience, because I was certain that this stake president would not be able to set me apart. I was certain that when he came up to do so, he would be given the impression this person cannot be set apart in this calling. And instead, he opened his blessing with the words, you have made the correct decisions for yourself, your wife, and your family. And that was the moment that I knew I was okay with God. Whether anybody else knew at that point, it didn't matter. I was okay with God and always would be. And I've never questioned where I was with God after that moment. It turns out that a mutual friend is actually a cousin of the stake president, and she asked if she could share that story with him. And he's currently the president of the St. Louis Temple. I live in St. Louis, Missouri. And he wrote me a letter, and he affirmed that the things that he had said that day, he had never said to anyone else. It was not some rote piece of a blessing that he used. And he fully believed that that blessing was meant for me, and that I had understood it and interpreted it correctly. My ward has been great. My Relief Society president is awesome. She was an advocate from the beginning, more strongly after a few months when she learned more about me. And she was the one who, hours after the new handbook came out with the new policies for transgender members, called me and said, I've already contacted the bishop to have you invited to Relief Society, because prior to that I was not allowed to attend either Relief Society or Elders Quorum Elders Quorum. And she made certain that I was invited as quickly as possible. And prior to that, she'd done everything that she could to include me. That did not require permission from the church, or did not require me to actually be a member of Relief Society. And she's just a shining example. Every member of my ward with whom I've interacted has been a wonderful example of loving and inviting and welcoming me as a member of the church who is also transgender. And as Ben mentioned, that's not always the story. There are many times, many stories of far greater tragedy, and I have lived a fairy tale. And I have not gone through all the terrible things that so many transgender people do, especially members of the church. And so I now make a point of using my time and talents and all that energy that I did not have to use to survive. I use that for other members of the church who do have those struggles. That's most of my story. Thanks, Evan.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you for being so open, honest, and vulnerable. Really appreciate that. Your courage and example. Thank you. Hey, Richard.
Hello, everybody. Can Evan give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen, the slides on my screen, and you can hear me talking? Okay. I'm just going to show a couple slides of a longer presentation that I share. My email's up, and if any of you would like a copy of this presentation, you can email me and I'll share you the full presentation. Let me see how quickly I can advance slides. As Evan mentioned, and really the heroes of this summit so far are Summer, Valerie, and Ben that share their story. That's how so much changed for me. Try to just move something a little bit. There we go. I was serving as a YSA bishop, and you can see the dates there. And I had priesthood responsibility for a couple gay men. It was the first time in my life I had responsibility for an LGBTQ Latter-day Saint. And I felt an impression from Heavenly Father to wipe my hard drive clean of everything I picked up. I can take a cholesterol test and get a number to kind of know how much work I need to do, but I didn't have a good way to understand the amount of homophobia or transphobia I had picked up. I was in my late 30s, I'm 50s, nearly 60 now. And so Heavenly Father just said, if you want to see and understand LGBT people, you've got to go listen to them and hear their stories. And so that's what I really tried to do and what I continue to do. I'm moving my little And that's when I connected with Ben Schilotti. I've tried to read everything Ben's wrote, and many of our LGBTQ Latter-day Saints in the church and that have left the church. I felt like that was important for me to understand both stories. These are a couple quotes that are important to me. In some matters, it's better to be intellectually uncertain rather than superficially true. Sure, this will still leave us with a great deal to be certain about while maintaining the humility to learn. Brothers and sisters, this is Elder Uchtdorf. As good as our previous experience may be, if we stop asking questions, stop thinking, stop pondering, we can thwart the revelations of the Spirit. Remember, it was the questions young Joseph asked that opened the door for the restoration of all things. We can block the growth and knowledge of our Heavenly Father intends for us. How often has the Holy Spirit tried to tell us something we needed to know, but we couldn't get past the massive iron gates of what we thought we already knew? So those quotes, I think, really apply to this space. If we're going to understand LGBT people, we've got to hear their stories. And we've got to be humble enough to set aside our opinions on what we felt is right and be open to new light and understanding. I've loved some of the, I'm going to skip this slide. This is a slide about common enemy intimacy. This is the idea that common enemy intimacy is the opposite of true belonging. If the bond we share is simply we hate the same people, the intimacy we experience is intense, immediately gratifying, and an easy way to discharge our outrage and pain. It is not, however, fuel for real connection. And we do this obviously politically, but sometimes we do this in our own congregations where we create a common enemy. And Ben pointed that out, and others, that often is LGBTQ people. And we universally kind of talk about how they're an outside threat, and we kind of create connection around this threat. But that threat's, our own people that are sitting in our own pews with us. And also this quote points out that that's not really the best way to survive and thrive as Latter-day Saints. Elder Uchtdorf talks about fear rarely has the power to change our hearts, and it will never transform us into people who love what is right. Never look down on any other religion or group of people. Sometimes I read scriptures and they have new meaning to me. Nephi 10:19, for he that diligently seeketh shall find, and the mysteries of God shall be unfolded unto them. In a couple years when I read the scripture, I thought, well, one of the mysteries of God are his LGBT children. How are they created? How do they fit in the plan? Why would God want someone and proactively create someone, I believe now, as LGBTQ? And most importantly, what can I do to lift their burdens? I won't go through these church statements. Evan kind of highlighted them. I didn't know these. And so it's important for us as leaders and as parents to be educated on the latest things the church is teaching. One of the ideas that has existed for as long as my lifetime is that somehow people can pray the gay or the trans away. And I've heard these stories and they're heartbreaking. Take my arms, take my eyes, endless deals with God, hyper-religiosity. I don't like to put bounds on the power of the atonement of Jesus Christ, but maybe it's like being left-handed or blue-eyed or red hair. The atonement doesn't change this, but it can, as Ben talked about, heal our broken hearts and bring peace. But the responsibility is no longer on LGBTQ people, it's on us to help them feel like they belong. I reference, this is a statement that's in my book I'll talk about from a mother of a transgender child. She's a Ward Relief Society teacher. I don't believe Satan's work is to deceive people into being LGBTQ. So I don't think Summer, Ben, or Valerie are deceived. Instead, Satan takes these precious children of God and tells them they're worthless. He tells them there's no place for them in God's plan. He tells them God no longer loves them. He resides in their shame. Satan also resides in our fears, knowing that our fears will hinder our ability to truly love. His goal is to tear families apart and drive people away. He is succeeding, not because this group has been deceived and are now gay or trans. He is succeeding because he is keeping us coming together as the body of Christ and loving with pure Christ-like love. We can do better to help heal these members who are hurting and feel they have a place with us. Every member is vital. Without them, we cannot function. The answer to overcome Satan is to strengthen families is love. This is another quote from an early morning seminary teacher. Teachers, please be aware you likely have an LGBTQ student or two in every class. Please let them know that being gay is not a sin, it's not a choice. Be aware that our LGBT youth and their family often feel alone. Let them know that you love them and listen to their experiences. Ask them how you can help. We now have open gay missionaries serving as missions, and they are some of our finest. How wonderful. And then she goes on just to talk about this. And this was a major paradigm shift for me. When I sat down, I've always heard the LGBT community. In my mind, I visualized a different group of people on a different road that posed a threat to me, my family, my faith. But that's all flipped for me. I don't see them as a different community. 4 to 6% of Americans identify as LGBTQ. If we assume that of the 16 million Latter-day Saints, 4 to 6% also identify as LGBTQ, that means we have 780,000 of our own people that identify and are LGBTQ. And I don't believe Heavenly Father's looking down and going, oh no, what went wrong? Ben Schilotti is gay or Valerie is trans. I don't think they're a mistake. I think everybody needs to look in the mirror and feel they're created as how they're intended to be created. And that puts us all on the same moral footing. Now, that doesn't change church teachings, but it helps people feel like they're not a mistake. And you can see some of the other points there. But if we put all those members, if we put those 780,000, this is pre-COVID, into BYU Stadium, that would fill BYU Stadium 12 times with our own people. And that's 2 full seasons of home games for those of you that are BYU football fans. And it just helps me to personalize it. We've got 3 right here, Summer, Valerie, and Ben, but there's 720,000 church-wide, and they're in our congregations, in our families, in our work circles. Ben Schilotti shared this in an LDS training session. It's part of church resources. When someone comes out to you, this is for leaders and for parents, for everybody. These are the 6 questions the church suggests that we ask. Will you please tell me more about your experience? What is this like for you? How have these feelings affected your life? How have they affected the lives of your family? How can I help? Would you like us to meet regularly and discuss this? And then a question about label. And there's no yes or no questions there. There's no questions reminding people to live the church teachings. My experience is my LGBTQ members are often walking encyclopedias on everything the church has taught. There's no reminders to keep the law of chastity. That is part of our doctrine and can come later. But these are questions that help people share their experience. And I love what Ben Schilotti's bishop said. What can I do so that I can understand and serve you better? I love what Evan Smith did as a bishop and created a culture that his own son felt comfortable to come out with him. And what a payday that is when someone comes out to us. I want to talk about gender dysphoria. This is a slide of Catherine Schweitzer. She does not experience gender dysphoria. I'm sharing a point here. She ran the Boston Marathon in 1967. I've run the Boston Marathon in about 2018. But in 1967, the assumption of society where women were too frail to run a marathon. And you couldn't even register as a woman. So she just registered and she ran with her coach. And you can see the race officials catching up to her and trying to rip off number 261 from her. And there she is on the right side of my screen anyway, 50 years later, running the marathon. And no one today would think twice about a woman running a marathon. But what's changed? Well, science, Evan talked about science, is our friend to help us understand that women could run marathons. God always knew a woman could run a marathon. Our cultural limitations, our assumptions, our conclusions kept us from understanding this. So what assumptions have we made about transgender people or about gay people that are these massive iron gates that Elder Uchtdorf talks about? Gender dysphoria, and it's better to hear obviously from Valerie, and you develop empathy when you hear a wonderful story like Valerie. This is the best example I've ever read, and it's part of this book that I'll talk about. Nika Allgood, the mother of a transgender son, talked about this in bullet point 2. Have you ever gotten car sick? Car sick, like other forms of motion sickness, occurs when your inner ears and your eyes disagree about whether you're moving. Gender dysphoria is like that. Awful, nauseating, headache-inducing wrongness from the disagreement of your mind and body. And you feel it every time you wear the wrong clothes or are called the wrong pronoun or hear your own voice or someone looks at you and see something you aren't. Every time you look in the mirror, every time you think about yourself, it's like a knife in the gut because it's wrong, wrong, wrong. But it's you, and it won't go away, and it won't stop, and it hurts like nothing you can imagine, and nothing I can describe. It hurts so much that you'd literally die. And Nika adds, lots of times for cisgender people, that's the opposite of transgender. I'm cisgender, I'm biologically male and feel male. People describe gender dysphoria as a mismatch between the brain and body. But that understands the reality that many trans people feel. For my son, it's distress, it is pain. And unlike car sickness, for 4 years, he couldn't get out of the car. And so Valerie is getting out of the car. And it's survival. It's not rebellion. It's not because she's been deceived by Satan. It's because we're beginning to learn something, and the science is our friend to understand why someone like Valerie feels the way she feels and is bravely living her authentic life and taking on female names because her gender identity is female. So transitioning is a way to deal with the pain of dysphoria. And everybody does that in their own unique way. And it doesn't cost me anything just to call Valerie Valerie and use she, her pronouns. And it just is part of respect. It's part of my baptism covenants. So I'm kind of watching my time here. I feel the church's relationship with its LGBTQ members is like a 40-chapter book. I don't know, we're not in chapter 40. That's why you as leaders are here. I don't know what chapter we're in. And I don't want to imply that future chapters have changed as to policy or doctrine, but they could. And if people have hope, things will change, like Evan said. As they continue to obey current teachings, we shouldn't disqualify them. We shouldn't say let's let people that have hope that things change feel like they're fully welcome in our congregations. But to me, chapter 40 looks like the congregations is the balm of Gilead for everyone. Another example is when parents learn they have a gay son or a gay daughter or a trans kid at 14. They have the same level of hope in this life and next life for their straight child. And currently, and some of you parents are those parents listening, there's fear. And to me, chapter 40 takes that fear. And where our missionaries take an LGBTQ message as part of our plan of salvation to the world. I'm not an activist. I don't know Heavenly Father's will on how we get to chapter 40, but we have more work to do. And I think it's okay to say that as a faithful Latter-day Saint and look to our leaders who I sustain and support to help us get to chapter 40. Sometimes I see things that are a new chapter, like our choir singing with the San Francisco Gay Choir. This is a really important slide, fitting in versus belonging. Ben, all three of the LGBTQ saints that have been on this session so far, fitting is assessing a situation, becoming who you need to be in order to be accepted. Belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. So Samantha, Valerie, and Ben have done this, and they are the square pegs. They are the LGBTQ Latter-day Saints. Look at the corner of those square pegs. It's fraying. It's splintering. That's the distress of being LGBTQ and LDS. And sometimes we or the LGBTQ person pounds that peg. They do everything they can to fit in. And eventually that plague splinters, and that can lead to feelings of suicide or actually dying by suicide. Notice in this picture, there are no square holes. It's on us to create square holes. We can't ask Ben and Valerie and Samantha to become round pegs, but they do better when they're authentic. They do better when they come out. Ben talked about coming out and telling everybody he's gay and how that created a sense of belonging for him. So not everybody needs to come out. It's not everybody's path, but it's on us to create a feeling of belonging and to help Valerie, Samantha, and all our LGBTQ members feel like they belong. Elder Uchtdorf, sometimes we confuse differences in personality with sin. We can even make the mistake that someone is different from us. It means they are not pleasing to God. I started a resource center. You can't donate. Everything I do is you can't donate, called listenlearnandlove.org. And we do a lot of podcasts. Evan and Ben have been on the podcast. We need to get Valerie and Summer on the podcast. But under listenlearnandlove.org podcasts, there's over 300 up there, so there's too many to listen to. But there is a section called Top Introduction Podcasts for Local Leaders. If you had to prioritize, that would be good ones to talk about. But you can see all the listing there of all the different podcast types: transgender, asexual, parents of LGBTQ people like Evan that are walking this road. And there's all the podcasts about all the difficult topics in our church that we are learning to talk about and we need to talk about within the walls of our church. I have a new book coming out. It's donated, the proceeds are donated to a young LDS teenager that died by suicide. It's called Listen, Learn, and Love, Embracing LGBTQ Latter-day Saints. It's mostly amplifying LGBTQ voices. There's hundreds and hundreds of stories of LGBTQ answering questions that I pose to them. And that's really my mission, is to amplify LGBTQ voices. It's available on Amazon now. It's in paperback and Kindle. It's available on audiobook. It's at Siegel Book. I was looking at the new releases in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints yesterday and today, and at Amazon, and I kind of think it's cool that the top 2 books on Amazon right now are LGBTQ books. Charlie Bird's books there. I actually want Charlie's to be number 1. His book should be read before my book. Ben's got a book. Valerie and Summer, their stories are more important than an ally story. My job obviously is to amplify voices. Let me talk about suicide just quickly. Not belonging is the most terrifying and destructive feeling a person can experience. It's not the same as being alone. It's the feeling that one is locked out of the possibility of human connection and powerless to change it. And in the extreme, this isolation can lead to hopelessness and despair. And people who do almost anything to escape that. That is how our gay and lesbian LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, many of them, feel. And we just need to develop empathy like Evan talked about. And I love the way Evan put his shoes in the same shoes as that young gay young man he was counseling, and recognized how difficult his road was. My father taught me something really important. He's 90 now and in great health, but his oldest son, when my father was a stake president, his oldest son's not gay, my brother, but he stepped away from the church. And in fact, he decided to join another Christian church. One Sunday afternoon in the late 70s, that's an old 70s station wagon, my parents, with all 6 of his brothers and sisters younger, we went to a small Christian church in downtown Salt Lake City, and we watched my brother get baptized into another Christian church. It was the finest teaching moment my parents have ever taught. They taught that nothing my brother could do or any of us could do could take us outside the circle of family love. And that is such an important principle for families, for local leaders. Tom Christofferson teaches that in his book. I recommend people read that. Eric Huntsman at BYU talks about his book. This is a great quote: "Accepting others, including people that have stepped away from the church, does not mean we condone or agree with or conform, but simply we allow the realities of their lives to be different than our own. I sometimes say it's a false dichotomy that to fully love and follow God, we need to stop loving some of his children. The commandment is love the Lord with all thy heart and love our fellow men as ourselves. Keeping my covenants doesn't require me to judge if other people are keeping their covenants. We just leave that at the Savior's feet and love. Sad heaven, I've just about done, I'm a little over time, is this idea that we mourn a future outcome. So if we have people in our congregations, even people we're counseling that step away, let's don't worry about their standing in the next life. Let's don't worry about empty chairs. Let's just leave that at the seat of let's don't mourn that now and leave that at the feet of our Savior. I think LGBTQ people need to largely self-determine their path. I invite everybody to stay. If Wes, Evan's son, if I were his wife, I'd say Bishop, I'd say Wes, I invite you to stay in the church. But at the same time, I'd say, Wes, I think you need to self-determine your path. I think you need to seek personal revelation and stay close to God. And I think you need to figure out your path, Wes. And Wes, and all of you, I will walk with you on your path, just like Evan's doing with his own son. I will support you. You kind of chart the path. You kind of self-determine your future. And I will walk with you on that path as a trusted priesthood leader, as a trusted parent, as a trusted friend. And I think that's the best approach we can take for everybody in our circle. And our job is to love and support. And this is just my last slide is see LGBTQ people as our people. This picture in the bottom right-hand corner is the young man who died by suicide that I've really dedicated my efforts to. Perfect love casteth out fear. I have no fear of LGBTQ people. They're my friends, those in the church and those outside of the church. And I have faith and support in our leaders. So I'll hand it back to you, Evan. Thank you for the chance to present.
Thank you, Richard, very much. And I've read Richard's book. It's amazing. So just for what it's worth, everybody go out and buy that. It's really good. We've got some great questions. Well, first off, thank you to everybody. Summer, Ben, Valerie, thank you very much for sharing your stories and for opening your hearts and just helping us all learn from your examples and better understand. We had some good questions come in by chat. So what we'll do, I have 3 questions, and I'd like to address them to Summer, Ben, and Valerie, kind of in that order. I think that's a good way to divide these up based on what they're talking about here. The first question, Alyssa says, what do I need to know and understand to serve you better? And that's one thing that Ben's bishop said. She says, I love that. What an inspired question from an inspired bishop. 40 minutes in, and I'm learning so much about how to be a better ally. Loves and hugs to everyone here. So that's a great comment. And then Ken follows up with that in the chat and says, I'd like that to be an open question. What do LGBTQ church members want other members to understand? So Ben, that's a question, it's a pretty broad question, but do you want to share any thoughts on that? What do you think LGBTQ church members want other members to understand?
Yeah, there is just honestly so many things. 2 things come to mind just from my personal experience. The first thing is that we have been thinking about this for years. And I don't think there's, I would be surprised if there's anything that you could say that we haven't already thought of. So I would say instead of focusing on like telling us, prescribing things for us, listening to us. And that resource that Richard talked about from counselingresources.churchofjesuschrist.org, there's this line in there that says to help LGBTQ members develop a relationship with God so they can receive personalized direction on their path. So I would say the most important thing you would help any LGBTQ member to do is to figure out how to receive revelation from God and have the courage to act on that. You know, I have a life that's different than Summer's life. But we have both felt personalized direction on our path. And I do not want anyone to hold me up as a poster child and say, Ben is figuring out how to do it as a single gay man. This is how people should live. 100% no. This is what I have felt called to do. So I would say that's one of the most important principles. Help LGBTQ members learn how to receive personal revelation and have the courage to follow it. The other thing I want to say that happens all the time is we have to stop dismissing LGBTQ experiences and comparing our lives to people who have a drug addiction or any other kind of trial or struggle. Like, that is not what's going on in my life. And one thing
We love your music. A little loud.
actually, could you mute yourself? You got some music in the background.
I got it.
Okay. As people compare me all the time to single women in the church, they'll say, Ben, it's not that bad. There's single women who are living great lives. You could just be like them, which really honestly diminishes my experience and their experience. So my sister is 2 years older than me. She's 38. She's never been married, and our experiences are so incredibly different. So, for example, my sister can pray every night that God will send her the perfect man tomorrow, and she can date and have a hope for that. That's not something I get. I don't get to hope that tomorrow I'll meet the perfect man. I already tried to meet the perfect woman, and those were terrible disasters. So I would just wish people would stop comparing us. And honestly, I think my life is easier than my sister's life because I'm single by choice and she is single by circumstance. And I think honestly, the fact that I'm like choosing to be single is easier than wishing I were married and not being able to be. And the other thing I would say is when people say, well, single women are happy in the church, so you should be too. They do not understand the reality of single women in the church who are lonely and sad and feel rejected. And that's not everyone's case, but I have many older single female friends who just really, really struggle with their relationship status. And so the other thing I would say is let's not diminish people's experiences. Let's listen to them, let's validate them, and let's invite them to be part of our families.
Thank you, Ben. That's really, really great. Before I move to the next question, I will open Valerie and Summer, anything to add on what you wish other members could understand? All right.
When we tell you who we are, that's what we're doing. We're laying out our barest soul and asking you to love us for who we are and not who you think we should be. And that is to know that we trust you and that we have a relationship with you that allows us to come to you and let you know that who is our authentic self, and that we want to be there. And as the quotes from Brene Brown about belonging and accepting, those are so important. We want to belong. Our faith didn't change because we came out. In fact, it probably got stronger in many cases. If we're still in church and we came out and we're still there, I can almost guarantee you that our faith got stronger and not weaker.
Thanks, Valerie. That's a really good point. It's amazing how much, I've seen my own son just have his faith and perspective be expanded through what he's been going through. And I'm not LGBT, but me too. I've seen just dealing with this issue, my heart has been opened. Some people ask me, would you ever want your son not to be gay? And I probably would have said yes a while, a few years ago. But at this point, no, not at all. The way he is it's beautiful. It's who he is. And I've learned more about loving like Christ does because of his experience than I ever would have experienced without it. And I think that's what we're here on earth to do, is to learn to love like Christ. And if this diversity is what it's all about, in my mind, that diversity it's sacred. So I would never want to change it. So, all right. Next question. This comes from Nathan Kitchen, who, for those who are here who don't know, Nathan is the head of Affirmation currently right now. Nathan is in a same-sex marriage. This is his question. He says, I have a question for the wisdom of our panel. How can church leaders best minister to and Summer, this question is going to go to you. I should heads up. How can church leaders best minister to same-sex couples who are members of the church? So same-sex married couples who are members of the church. There's a much larger population of us in the church than one would think. Although there is a learning curve with LGBTQ issues, it seems a much easier thing to minister to single LGBTQ members. So Summer, the difference between ministering to a same-sex married couple who's still attending church versus a single LGBTQ person.
That's a good question. I don't think that I would necessarily say it would be easier counseling with or talking with someone who is single, has chosen to be single and in the LDS religion. So maybe I wouldn't say I wouldn't say that it would be easier one way or the other, but I think in a lot of ways it would be the same in the ways that as church leaders we should be talking to our LGBTQ members. And I think a big thing for me and my spouse, and one thing that I'm really grateful for in my ward currently, is I'm grateful for the people who treat us as a normal couple, because ultimately that is what we are. And I so appreciate people who ask questions about my spouse. My spouse doesn't come to church with me. It's not a healthy place for them right now. But I'm so appreciative of people who actually take interest in my life instead of keeping that as something that is taboo or shouldn't be talked about. And so I think ultimately all of this and treating us as normal people as we are kind of goes back to my first point of being a friend. And part of being a friend is we're all different, and being friends with people are different is what enriches our lives. And I was talking to my sister the other night about one thing that she really appreciates from church is that there are all these unique people who have these different perspectives or maybe political views, but we all come together to reconnect and hopefully to feel that kind of belonging as a group of people who are all searching for God and connection. And so I really appreciated that insight that she had, that, even though we're all different, we can all be friends and find common ground and find belonging. And for me, on my personal journey, deciding to pursue a relationship and get married, I've seen that as part of me fitting into God's plan for me. And when I think about church principles, or say the plan of salvation, because what I've learned as a child, that I was made with purpose and intention, that I was created in the image of God, then that God must expand to be reflected as every person on the spectrum of being. And so I think when I think about my purpose in life, my purpose or role in the plan of salvation, I think it's important for church leaders and church members to remember that LGBTQ folks, no matter what path we go, we embark on, that we are still involved in the plan of salvation, the greater plan of happiness. And going back to kind of being friends with different views or opinions, I think as part of my understanding of God is that God loves diversity, that God is the creator of diversity. And I mean, if we weren't meant to be different than each other, or to look different, or to have different experiences, or to be LGBTQ, then we wouldn't be that way. And so for me, my understanding of God is that God loves diversity. And that's something that we need to embrace as church leaders and as church members, is that this diversity is something that enriches our lives. And going to church, we can participate in learning from that diversity and learning from these people who maybe we wouldn't expect to interact with at any other place but at church. And so I think as we're trying to help church be a more inclusive or welcoming place as church leaders, I think we always need to go back to, what is the purpose of church? What is the purpose of even being part of a religion or an institution such as the LDS faith? And to me, I really think that is to be like Christ, or to be like God. And when I think about Christ or God, I think about the teachings in the scriptures about Jesus sitting with people who no one else would sit with, Jesus being interested, being protective of people who were different or who led different paths that others looked down upon. And he talked with, he loved, he included, he validated those that were scorned. And he was someone that sat with people in their vulnerability, in their in their uncertainty, on different parts of their paths. And that to me is what I would hope that church leaders could continue to exemplify and encourage their members to do the same, is to really going back to those simple truths that we talk about in the gospel of loving people and loving as God would, seeing us as all children of God. And so I think if that can be kind of our guiding rule, perhaps as church leaders or members, is going back to that simple call to love one another and let that guide all of our actions and our responses. I think that's been, and hopefully something that I can hopefully do for people who are also different than me at church as I attend.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Summer. Love one another, not just those that are like us. Love everybody. The diversity is a sacred thing. That's great. Kent submitted a question that, while we're on the topic of kind of same-sex marriage and couples in the church, that I think we can address. And he's asking it for Summer and Nathan. So Nathan, if you want to chime in, would you be comfortable in talking about your marriage and how it supports and reconciles with being gay, to perhaps give similar hope and guidance to others that may like to choose a similar path?
Yeah, absolutely. Does Nathan want to go first?
Yeah, go ahead, Nathan. Then we'll let Summer have the last word.
Yeah,
you all tell me.
good.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay. One of the reasons why I asked this question is I am part of one of the last generations of young men that were counseled to marry in the mid-'80s as a remedy for having homosexual feelings. And so I enjoyed a mixed orientation marriage, which means me being married to a woman for 20, 23 years. And I understand, I know firsthand what it's like to build an institution with somebody else. I know the mental and physical health that happens when you have melded your life with someone and you're building. And then, as I came out, my whole life realigned. For some in a mixed orientation marriage, it works. For others, it doesn't. For me, I lost my marriage of 23 years. But to be able to finally marry the love of my life, according to my orientation, is nothing less than holy, because I understand what marriage is and the benefits of what it is to sojourn and travel in this mortal life with another individual. So for me, when I usually intersect with my leaders, and I think this really depends on where you live. Like my stake president is more concerned about talking about sex rather than marriage, or how can I help and sustain you. And I'm a member of the church, but to know and be told that my blessings are on the line, that my sealing with my children could just be summarily canceled by having my membership withdrawn, it really creates a barrier to the pastoral care of me as a gay man that has made these self-determination choices that have blessed me, have blessed my children. And so, that's why I ask. I don't know, my generation is aging. We have a brand new generation now that's, instead of being asked to go into mixed orientation marriages, they're asked to be celibate. And I don't know what that's going to look like in the church in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, when we have a class of LGBTQ individuals like me, but instead of being in mixed orientation marriages, what that looks like. What does celibacy look like for these young people in the church 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? So that's why I was just curious, how best can we as leaders minister to the whole broad spectrum. There is surprisingly a large group of same-sex married couples who are in the church. And I would love to know more of the wisdom and what everyone thinks about how to best provide trauma-informed pastoral care for all those that come and want to be a part of the saints of God, who have a testimony of the church, the restoration, and who so desire to be seen home by the goodly parents that our heavenly parents are.
Thank you, Nathan. I can chime in on one thought that came to my mind, and then I'll let you talk about the marriage question. But recently in February, the handbook was changed. That so same-sex marriage is no longer in the category of a must-have disciplinary council. It's actually called a membership council now. It's no longer that leaders must have a membership council if someone enters into a same-sex marriage. It's now it may be necessary. So I think on pastoral care, Nathan, for people who are now in gay marriages, leaders have the opportunity to love them and reach out to them in the exact same way that they would to someone who's living with someone outside of marriage, a straight person. They're in the same sort of category now. And I got to tell you, as a bishop, there were a lot of people in my ward that I didn't see at church on Sundays, but that I knew were kind of inactive, and they may be living in a situation that wasn't consistent with church standards. I didn't know. These are straight people I was thinking about. I didn't go out and try to find them so that I could excommunicate them. I didn't do that. I just was okay with them being where they were and hoping that they would come back to church someday. And I think a lot of church leaders can they now have that ability in the handbook to take that same sort of approach. I think actually going a step further would be great, and actually reaching out to that couple and saying, come to church. I can't give you a sample recommend. I can't do this and that, but I would love to have you in church, and I'm not forced to discipline you. So please come. The handbook does that now. It allows that flexibility. So that's just one opinion that I have. So anyway, Summer, do you want to address the question?
Yeah, sure. No, that's great insight. And I think I was really, I'm very hopeful by the new advice for leaders in church when counseling with LGBTQ folks, to encourage them to be able to have that close relationship with God so that they can decide what is best for them on that journey. And I think that really feels right to me, because being brought up in a church that is what was founded really on personal revelation, that really helps me to have confidence finding my own truths and knowing what is good for my journey. And so I think a part of maybe what would be good for church leaders to do is to have trust and to have faith in our LGBTQ members, that they can practice this amazing gift that we have to communicate personally with God and to find our personal truths, to continue to encourage LGBTQ members to really have that relationship with God, or to look for truth and goodness on their own. And I think that what's really helped me is my relationship with God and being my own, what we call specific authority. While there are general authorities, they have advice and good things to say to the general public, but trusting ourselves. And I've found that trusting myself as my own specific authority has given me a lot of confidence to do and understand the things that I need to do to have joy. And for me, I think going back to kind of the idea of the plan of salvation, the purpose of us being here, and part of our purpose is to find joy and have joy. And for some people, that may look like being part of the church and being single. And for some people, that may look like leaving the church completely. And for some people, it may be kind of having one foot in both worlds. But I think that if we can trust ourselves to know what joy is for us, to look for that good and to look for that joy, I think God has created everything that is good. And so as we search through our own personal revelation, as we search for our own joy, that I found a lot of comfort when deciding to get married, in looking for the good that I believe that God has allowed me to find. And so when thinking about, like when reconciling my marriage within the LDS church, which says that it's not correct, I think I've found a lot of peace knowing that all good things come from God. And my feeling with my spouse is that I've found something so good and joyful that I want to hold on to it. And that has brought me closer to God. And so I think just personal revelation has just played a really big part of my relationship with the church or with God, which ultimately I found that my relationship with God is a whole lot stronger or more important than my relationship with the institution.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. I have a few quotes in my book that talk about the idea that, and these are from apostles, the idea that our personal revelation is absolutely just as important in our sphere of our lives as their revelation for the entire church is in their sphere. So their revelation, their authority is wider than ours, but it's not superior to ours. And I think that's something that I wish more leaders in the church, I wish I would have done a better job as a bishop, to be honest, counseling that young man. There's a different way I counseled him than I counseled my own son, to be honest. There's a sense of, when it was my own son, it was a little bit more personal, and I gave Wes a little more liberty to find that personal revelation, even if it conflicted with some church teachings, because I saw there were scriptural examples where sometimes people went against the grain, and that was what God wanted. And I knew that I needed to be open to that with my own son, but it was not as easy when I was a leader to do that. So I think that's a really insightful point. I love that, the difference between the general authority revelation and our specific personal revelation. So thank you, Summer, for sharing that. Okay, we're getting more questions coming in. Nathan privately messaged me and said we can actually keep this line open. We can keep the room going as long as there's questions that come in. So we do have a kind of an end time in 20 minutes, but if the conversations keep coming and we keep having good discussion, we can keep going. So the next question comes from Emily Nelson. She says, as Richard was listing the damaging messages Satan sends to LGBTQ people, I couldn't help but think that many of those messages are coming through the church. How can LGBTQ people have a real place in the church when the church effectively offers no real place for them in the plan of salvation? For those who don't know Emily, she is a mother of a gay son, actually one of the moderators of a Facebook group called I'll Walk With You, which is a support group for LDS parents of LGBTQ children. So Valerie, I think I'll direct that question to you, and obviously any of our panelists can please chime in too, but how can LGBTQ people have a real place in the church when the church effectively offers no real place for them in the plan of salvation?
So that's a very interesting question. And it's kind of unfortunate that sometimes I listen to General Conference, not so much to know what the messages are going to be, but to know who I'm going to have to comfort afterwards. For me, I had to do two things. I separate the gospel from the institution, and I separate policy from doctrine. And we are so quick to take some cultural things and some policy things and teach them as doctrine or share them as doctrine or even believe them as doctrine. And in discussing this with my stake president, I said, we say that doctrine does not change right up until it does. And I point out several things. It was doctrine about the people of color holding the priesthood, and we saw that change. We had doctrine about LGBT people, and then in 2015, suddenly it changed, and it was taught as doctrine. And then 3.5 years later, it was changed again. And then just this year, we finally have articulated transgender policies, which are different from what was being done in a more private way whenever someone came out as LGBTQ. When someone came out as transgender. And For instance, in my case, it was nothing but wonderful news, because I'm already endowed, I'm already sealed to my spouse, I'm already sealed to my children. I can't go to the temple, but I've already gone through all those ordinances. But for younger people who don't have that opportunity, that can be devastating. And I can't imagine why someone can't go through their own endowment, at least, whether they want someone to go through as proxy because they have questions about gender. I can't answer that question. But I don't understand why you couldn't go through for yourself. Each of us has to decide what it is that we're going to accept and set aside as we engage in our activity within the church. For me, I still continue to believe in the salvific ordinances. I believe that the gospel, core of the gospel, is true. Loving each other is true. I believe that we have to have the priesthood and that it was restored, and we have the correct priesthood. We have to be baptized. We have to do those things. But everything else I look at as quite oftentimes the result of someone making a decision. And I tell people that no one who receives revelation can help but receive that revelation through the lens of their own understanding, their own biases, and possibly their own prejudices. And as a consequence, we are asked to pray about every piece of revelation that we are told by our general leaders, to get our own testimony of those things. And there have been times when I have had to say, no, this is not what I believe. I stayed away from the entire LGBTQ community for over 50 years because I could not in any way associate with the LGBTQ community because it was too painful to be on the fringe and not be all the way in. So I stayed away from it completely. But every time I heard the messages internally, I was going, no, this is not right. This is not the way. And yeah, so we do hear messages. And I have these conversations with people after we hear some of the messages that come across the pulpit, discussing how we weigh what we hear with what we know about ourselves and comparing our personal revelation, the things that we have been told individually, with the things that we may have heard from our leaders.
Thank you, Valerie. It's good to know the difference between doctrine. Doctrine definitely. There's a quote from a historian, Greg Prince. I think he says every doctrine in the church has evolved. There's not a single one. So the restoration's ongoing, right? We don't know what's coming next. All right, the next question comes from Claire, and it says question for the panel, but I'm going to deviate a little bit and actually direct this one to someone who's not on our panel, but who's already spoken a little bit here. So Nathan, this one's coming your way, so the heads up. What guidance would you give for church leaders who might be inclined to encourage someone who is gay to marry someone of the opposite sex? So given your years spent in a mixed orientation marriage, Nathan, I thought maybe this question would be best directed to you.
All right.
Hope that's okay.
No, thank you. I'm a dentist, and so I'm a medical professional. And so the entire crux of my practice lies on providing informed consent for all of my patients. We become co-therapists together in their treatment as they meet their dental health goals, as they heal health problems that they have. Informed consent is the crux of a patient's self-determination. And I think back to the day when I was 17, and I had just finished watching Conference. President Benson gave an address saying we must cleanse our inner vessel. And at that moment, I knew that I needed to go to my bishop, confess my homosexuality, and cleanse my inner vessel, because that was the vernacular that I understood, because I had grown up in the days of the miracle of forgiveness, where homosexuality is repugnant. It's a behavior that is it's akin to murder. And I'm like, I am following the prophet. I am cleansing. And so I went in and in the mid 80s, just society in general, we were very much less aware of gay and lesbian issues, almost unaware of bisexual issues. And like Valerie mentioned, there was no thought about transgender issues at that point. And so the resources for me as a young man, I mean, there was not a Mama Dragons there. I didn't even know a gay person. Were none. And so my decisions were based solely on my dear bishop, who did the best that he could and set me on a course that I have no regrets for. I don't regret the course that I took. Was it hard? Yes. But I left his office in full confidence that I was moving forward as God wanted me to move forward. And for me, that was through advice that I don't even think about what it means to be gay, or even address what that may mean or what it is. It just being gay wasn't a thing. And so without the ability of any kind of informed consent, I made decisions with the best information I had at the time. And I think that this is the grace that we should give every single LGBTQIA plus individual in the church, that we are making the best decisions we can with very difficult issues, with the best information that we have at the time. There's nothing nefarious about what we do. There's no hidden agenda about the choices we make. The choices we make are important to us, and we are wise, and we make them with a lot of confidence. And so I didn't have the benefit of informed consent. And so I think nowadays informed consent is highly important. And so when young LGBTQIA plus individuals are thinking and talking about what they want to do with their life, and especially in this case, entering into mixed orientation marriage, there has to be a lot of mental health counseling with professionals and with mentors and peers that have been there before, because mixed orientation marriage, it works at certain times. And it blesses people's lives when they choose, and both the spouse and the gay or lesbian spouse understand what is happening. There are pitfalls, there are special things that you have to know together. And even then, a lot of times the marriage doesn't work. But to be able to enter into the institution of marriage with full informed consent is vital and critical, and anything less, I would just call that spiritual malpractice, to think that everything can go away or be different if you do marry. I mean, we know that is not the council of the church. That's not the official council of the church. When I met with the bishop in '87, it was in '86, it was the next year that President Hinckley stood at conference and gave his famous conference address over the pulpit that said that we now do not counsel young men to marry to overcome homosexual inclinations, as he said. So I think that we should be very careful as leaders, and even as an LGBTQ peer group, that we are not forcing our own ideas or own path. Like Summer says, trust in the general authority of each LGBTQ member to be able to make the self-determined choices for them. And then once they make these choices, we spend our time helping them and helping them along the way and not being detractors. So that, short story to this is you have to think long and hard about mixed orientation marriages. I am part of several groups in Affirmation with hundreds of people that are either in a mixed orientation marriage or who are now out of it. And it can be a traumatic experience. And when you're in a mixed orientation marriage, you're just not bringing you along on this ride. It's you, it's a spouse, it's children. and our beloved children who love us and don't quite understand what is going on have to make sense of this entire thing. And if we enter something without informed consent or half-heartedly because someone else has told us to do it, we just have an entire crowd of people that get to come out with us, feel the pain and the trauma as we write and reorganize our life with the new best information that we have received in our lives. So I hope that that was a good answer that satisfies that about mixed orientation marriages.
Thank you, Nathan. That was a really good answer. And Claire, if I could be, I'll be so bold as to add a little bit onto that as someone who was in the state presidency and so did a lot of trainings for bishops and things. If I heard of a bishop who was inclined to advise, any gay person that they should enter into a mixed orientation marriage, I would make sure that that bishop knew that that was not the church's position now. The church does not recommend that anyone enter into a mixed orientation marriage. In fact, in my book, I include a few quotes from some brethren that say you should only enter into a mixed orientation marriage if there's genuine attraction present to the spouse. So that kind of leads me to think that now the church's position is if you experience same-sex attraction, you should really only enter into a mixed orientation marriage if you also experience opposite sex attraction to at least that person. You have to be attracted to them. And so that maybe some bisexual people can make mixed orientation marriages work. Some other very small percentage of gay folks make mixed orientation marriages work. They do work sometimes, but it's very, very rare. I don't know if I think the studies show that it's 2 to 3 times more likely to end in divorce is what the studies show. So it's something I would want to make sure that bishop, before they advised anyone to do that, knew what the church's position was, knew what the likelihood for success wasn't, and that they were aware that that's not something they should be counseling. So again, leave it up to each member. So, all right, next question. This is a question for Richard Osler. Comes from Marcy McPhee. You quoted lovely words from Elder Uchtdorf, but I could counter those words with some quotes from other church leaders. How can one sustain our leaders when they say things that feel so wrong?
Good question, Marcy. Couple thoughts. I think the first thing we need to do is validate that our leaders say things that cause pain to members of our church. I think sometimes as committed Latter-day Saints, our inclination is to defend everything the church says, stands for. And I think sometimes the first thing we could do, and I know you know this, Marcy, is just sit with people in their pain. We can do that and support our leaders. So we can acknowledge as faithful Latter-day Saints that our leaders say things that can and do cause pain. And there has been, I've sat with people, as many of you are those very people, that have felt so much pain around what our leaders have said. And that kind of goes back to the 40-chapter book, is the earlier chapters represent the pain of the things that we've said. And we should have known better. We should have done better. And so that can be very difficult. And so I've just learned, I have my testimony in the church has just a few fallen dominoes. I have things that have about LGBTQ, particularly what we've said in the past and making a home for everybody now. It's just an area, it's kind of a fallen domino where we have work to do, but I have other dominoes that keep me a deeply committed member. But I realize that formula was worked for me, that doesn't work for everybody, just because this is a really complicated space and our leaders have spoke with limited understanding. I want to come back to a couple earlier things, just a quick comment on how to make the congregation wide and should we welcome same-sex couples. And I think the principle is here, the gate should be wide at the congregation level. There should be no belief or behavior hurdle for welcome in a Latter-day Saint congregation. The temple is where the gate narrows a little bit with a belief and behavior hurdles. So I've always felt in our families, in our congregation, the principle is everybody feels welcome. There's no belief or behavior hurdle. If you're in a same-sex marriage, you should feel welcome. And what's the doctrinal foundation for that? It's what Christ did. in his ministry. And everything he did was to take people that society said were not worthy, and he declared them worthy by being with them and inviting them to his table fellowship. I also think, and I think this group knows this, we don't want to make like someone like Ben Schilotti the hero today and the villain tomorrow. So, you know, we've got Nathan and Summer here in same-sex marriages, and Ben says this himself. He says, "Don't make me the poster boy, but let's see everybody as a beloved child of God who's doing the best with the road they're walking." And I don't look at Ben and Nathan and Summer or Valerie. I don't see them through different eyes. In fact, I don't even see them versus LGBTQ. I just see them as people that are doing the very best they can to walk the road the very best they can. And I develop a lot of empathy for Nathan when I hear what he was taught to do. He just did the best he could. And let's don't make him the bad guy of what's wrong with society. He's a dentist. He's leading Affirmation. He's trying to bring common ground. I don't look at his marriage as fake. My straight marriage can stand on its own merits. I don't need to point out Nathan's marriage or Summer's and somehow validate my marriage. In fact, I want their marriages to succeed. Anybody that goes into a marriage and enters that covenant together, I want that marriage to work. I don't sit on the sidelines and hope it'll fail to somehow prop up my marriage. To me, that's not part of my baptism covenants as an active Latter-day Saint. I want everybody's lives to be happy, and what they feel is the best path for them, I just support them. That to me doesn't cost me anything in my beliefs about the church. In fact, it is my doctrine to love and support and honor personal agency and leave all judgment to our Savior. So, Evan, I kind of went on a rampage there, but that's a little bit coming back to the original question, just that there is pain out there. And I think we need to sit with people in their pain. And often that's all that they need to sort of move on, is just validating that indeed our leaders have said things that often have caused pain. We can do both.
Thank you, Richard. That was a very nice rampage, I should say. Thank you for that. If I'll chime in again on that, just how do you sustain leaders? When I was a bishop, I would ask people sometimes during tithing settlement if there was anything I could do better. And sometimes that took them by surprise. As a bishop, why are you asking me this? And I like the feedback. And I think one of the ways that I've come to realize we can sustain our leaders is by letting them actually know when what they say hurts us. Now, you got to do that in a careful way. You got to be loving. You got to be respectful. Let them know that you're not their enemy. But to respectfully say, excuse me, that really, really hurt when you said this. I think that's important. And I think, it's a key to not expect them to be perfect, and then to help them with that bit of information. President Nelson said, good information leads to good revelation. Well, our leaders can't get that good revelation and that good inspiration unless they have the information about how they're hurting some people. And so I think it's good for us to speak up, and that's a way we can sustain people. That's my justification for writing a book that kind of does that. To be honest, it just says this is a hurtful situation going on. So, all right. Well, it's
one comment on sustaining, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that sometimes when we're asked if we sustain our leaders, the question may be asked with this intention, or we may interpret it as, do we agree with everything that they said? And we tend to have an infallibility belief about some of our leaders. But in my case, I can sustain them in their office because they're doing the best that they can, and they're trying, and they're human. And so I sustain them in their activity and in their office. It is sometimes difficult to sustain some of the words that they said. But when asked that question, when I raise my hand in church, the answer is yes, I sustain them in their efforts.
That's really, really good point. Yeah, sustain them in their desires to do what they feel is righteous. And no one's perfect. No, there's not a single prophet who would say he's perfect. I guarantee you, no one says that. So, well, we've reached the end of our time, and we've also conveniently reached the end of questions. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to send them through by chat now. Kind of speak now or forever hold your peace, I guess. I just personally want to say thank you to everybody who's participated on the panel. One of the things I've heard a lot today is letting LGBTQ people self-determine. So for any church leaders listening, that is a huge message to take away from this, is to trust God to communicate to our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, and to let them, to trust that they will feel his love and do what's right for their lives consistent with that love. I wish I had done a little bit better job as a bishop and as a father of coming to that realization sooner, that God can be sometimes bigger than the church and has things in mind that are could be bigger than we have and can understand right now from what's been revealed. So I'm going to right now, if anyone would like to talk to an individual panelist on their own, we have some links that we can send that I'm going to paste into the chat right now, if I can find the links to copy. These are breakout rooms, and you click on them and you'll be able to join with panelists individually to kind of continue the conversation. And those can stay open for as long as we need them to. We can continue to kind of take questions and answers. So thank you all very much for everything. I was reading some of the chats. Thank you all for your comments in the chat. So I hope this session was uplifting and it was something that everyone can learn. I'm gonna now stop talking and let all my panelists give a final word. I'll let you go. So let's go in the same order we did before. Summer, go ahead. Any concluding remarks?
Well, I just want to say thank you for the panelists being part of this, and for all the wonderful audience members who have contributed so much and asked so many good questions. And I think in closure, I pray that we can just look at each other with understanding and love, with perfect love, which is what God is, and that love can cast out fear, that we can connect, and that though right now we do see through a glass darkly, I really do look forward to the day when that glass will become clear, when our vision will become elevated, when we can love more fully. And so I just want to thank all of you for your efforts to make your ward and your congregations a more inclusive place. And I just have so much gratitude for all of you for that.
Thanks, Ella. Ben, any last words?
I just want to say that I love the Restored Gospel so much. It infuses every part of my life and enlivens me and just means so much to me. And I am so grateful for the people in my life who let me live the principles of the gospel and let me follow the inspiration I receive. And instead of putting me in a box, giving me wings to soar. And the church leaders who have done that for me have really changed my life and put me on a course that has helped me to thrive. So I just want to thank you for being here, and just thank publicly those people who have given me the freedom to be me.
Thanks, Ben. Valerie?
Yes, thank you everyone for coming here and showing an interest in trying to find the best way to reach out to all of your members. I've been asked what advice I would give to someone who is transgender and thinking about what they should do with their lives, whether they should come out. And I tell them this and I'll adjust a little bit from our perspective for this panel. I tell them that you deserve to be loved for who you are, not who people think you are. And people cannot love you for who you are until they know who you are. So if it is safe, I advise people to at least come out. Whether someone who is transgender transitions or not is a different question. But knowing who you really are is vitally important. And from a leader's perspective, the same thing goes. When someone comes and tells you who they are, believe them. They are the authority on themselves. They may be in the middle of a journey. They may still be exploring, but they need to be allowed to complete that journey and let it take them where it takes them. In the meanwhile, when they've told you who they are, love them for exactly who they are, and not who you wish they were, not who you thought they were, but who they are.
Thank you, Valerie. Richard.
I used to think my job was to sort of be the Good Samaritan to rescue LGBTQ people, but they are rescuing me. They are teaching me things about the gospel of Jesus Christ that my straight friends have never taught me. They have helped me develop better empathy, better Christ-like attributes. So yeah, part of our mission as allies is to help amplify LGBTQ voices, but in reality, they're helping me and saving me. And so I'm grateful for the LGBTQ people in my life. And I've had the chance to give hundreds of priesthood blessings to LGBTQ Latter-day Saints in and out of the church. And I have blessed some of the most valiant premortal spirits that heavenly parents love beyond my comprehension. And that's been deeply moving to me. So honored to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks again to everyone. And if you are looking to join the individual breakouts with anyone in particular, please go to the chat now before you leave the meeting, copy the link for the person you'd like to speak with, and then you can paste that in for Zoom and click on it and you'll go to that meeting. For our panelists, I'm about to send you an email that has the links, so you'll be able to get them and go into those meetings now. I think it's probably fair to say everybody can take a 5-10 minute break before you go and join those meetings, but they should be ready very shortly. So thanks again, everyone. I hope we can all love better. Thanks, everybody. Bye.